we're going to continue on. Just continue to enjoy your meal. But we have with us this evening Dr. Michelle Arnold from the University of Kentucky. So at this time, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Arnold.
So, as it's told, I'm Dr. Michelle Arnold. I'm at the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Some of you may have been there before. Over there off Newtown is where I spend most of my time. So we're going to talk tonight about dewormers. And the title is Dewormer Resistance. So what we're starting to see, and a lot of these dewormers we use, especially the porons, they're not working like they should. They're not working nearly as well as when they first started out. So just broadly, there's a couple of two different classes basically of dewormers that we use in beef cattle. These are the ones that they come in either poron or an injectable form. Most of these will kill all the internal parasites and then some control of the external parasites like flies, but not for very long. Doesn't have much external control. It does a really good job on the internal parasites and it'll last a while. It's got a residual effect. So these things will kind of hang around in the system for about 3 to 4 weeks after you give it. Except for this one. This one, are you familiar with long range? It is fairly new. It's prescription product, but this one, if you give it, will last 120 days. So it's your long-acting one. The other class of dewormers are these what we call the white dewormers, and these have to be given by mouth. So they're not very popular, just for that reason, because they're more trouble to get. They're really effective though. They're really much better at killing those internal parasites than the others that we use. But the other drawback of these is they only last one day. They last the day they go through their system. And it kind of goes right through and cleans all the parasites out of their gut, and then they're gone. So you don't get that long-lasting effect. Basically just a day. So that's kind of the reason these fell out of favor. You know, they weren't used for a while. But what ended up happening is when those others quit working, the porons quit working as well, we looked back at these and said, hey, these are really working well. So we got those two different kinds. We want to think about when to use which. You know, are there times where these are better, there's times the others better, and there's times when you can use them together, same time. And that's actually really, really effective. So this is kind of a fancy thing that I read in one of my vet magazines. Now we're forced to accept the reality that chemical control of helminths, that's worms, is not sustainable. So strategically and effectively applied chemical intervention, that's your dewormers, coupled with non-chemical measures, will lessen economic parasitism. That economic parasitism means you're going to lose money. You're losing money from parasites. And it's not always easy to see. It's not something that you can look at them and say, gee, you're not gaining like you should. But it's a difficult thing to put your finger on. Again, what that means, just controlling the number of parasites is not really going to cut it. Just controlling it by giving dewormers. We're going to have to be a little more strategic in how we think about it. Doing certain dewormers and on certain animals at the right time and at the right dose. And also there's management things we can do that will change our situation. How do you know? How do you know you got a problem with your dewormer? Is it working or not? The warning signs: lower than expected weight gain. You know, these calves just did not gain like they should have. So you see that as reduced weaning weights. You might see that rough hair coat and diarrhea. We don't see that too much anymore, as much as we do the others. Delayed puberty and conception, so they're slower to get to maturity, and there is some immune suppression, so they get more diseases. And again, this is kind of a hard thing to pick out. But if you suspect something, there is one test we can do called the fecal egg count reduction test. It's where we take fecal samples of 20 animals within a group, say a group of cows or a group of calves or maybe the replacement heifers. We take a fecal sample at the time they get dewormed and then send that to the lab. The lab, does their thing and figures out how many eggs. They do an egg count, number of worm eggs. Come back in a couple of weeks and take samples again from that group into 14 days later, and we look for that decrease. There should be a 90% or better decrease in the number of eggs if your dewormer's working. But sometimes we don't see that, and oftentimes we don't see that with the generic porons, those porons that are the cheap ones, that you can, there's a whole lot of different dewormers. Most of them are expensive. When you find that really cheap poron, that's usually an ivermectin generic form, and those are the ones we have probably the most problem with. Okay, so treatment failure though isn't always due to the chemical. So remember this is really, really important. And there's anything you get out of this talk, remember this one. If we underdose dewormers because we don't get the weight right, it's all based on weight. If we get the dose wrong, or we say, all right, they weigh on average 500 pounds. So if somebody that's 600 pounds is getting this, a dose that's 100 pounds under what it should be. So you want to base your dewormer dose on the heaviest animal, not the average. Based on heaviest animal. Make sure your dosing equipment's working. Especially if you use a gun and you're giving that stuff by mouth, those things will get clogged up. and there are times that they don't work. So you gotta kind of watch, make sure your equipment's working. Problems with the porons, they are supposed to actually go on the skin. And a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too, kind of fly through it, sort of throw it on there, it goes on the hair, it goes on the fence, it goes wherever. It's kind of got to be deliberate in putting that nozzle down on the skin and trying to get it actually on the skin past the hair. Other things like using old products that may not work as well. And then we've got, as far as the testing goes, sometimes there's errors with that. But it is really important to get that dose right. So about parasites, here's what kind of the interesting thing. It's like Dr. Lay said with the immune system. Immune system, same way with parasites. So when they're young, they haven't had parasites before, those are the ones that are most affected. By the time they're about 3 years old, adult cattle rarely have parasite problems. They've already made that immune response to them. So we have to really focus your attention on the calves and cows and bulls up to about 2 to 3 years of age. Beyond that, you can probably use the cheap generic ivermectins. It's not going to hurt anything. The older cows, they just don't have the trouble that these young animals do. So use your dollars wisely. Buy the good products and deworm these young animals because they're the ones that get a lot of gut damage from parasites. Lots of different types in cattle. This is just a picture of the worm eggs that we look for in the lab. You take a fecal sample, bring it to us, we'll process it and then look at it under the microscope, try to figure out what parasites you've got. And so we worry the most about this one, this Ostertasia, also known as the brown stomach worm. I'll show you some pictures of that shortly. Cuperia is another one that we have a lot of trouble with in young calves under a year. And Homuncus is the other one that we have trouble with in cattle that are under a year of age. So these two kind of for the young animals under a year, this one for the adult. If we just focus on those, that's really where we have to, the ones that cause the most problem. So that brown stomach worm has a long name, Ostertagia, I can't even say it. Ostertagia, Ostertagi, I guess. Again, that's the one we usually see yearling and older, yearling young cows, okay? It's a cool season. This is the time of year right now. 40 to 68 degrees is when that parasite's active. We'll talk about this arrested development in just a second here. I'll show you. This is actually a picture of the lining of the stomach. This is where these parasites go. I think I got a better picture. Next slide. Well, this is their life cycle. Let me go over it really quickly. So the cow has grazed and picked up these larvae from the grass, goes into her system. In there, it takes about 3 weeks to go in the stomach from the larvae to an adult and start laying eggs. Once they pass the eggs in the feces, then the egg hatches and it goes through these larvae stages, L1, L2, L3. L3 is the one that gets here on the grass that they actually eat, start the cycle all over again. And this parasite's kind of strange in that when it gets hot, all right, when it gets hot outside, we're getting ready to get to that time of year. When it gets hot, it says, I'm not going to last. I am not going to live if she poops me out because I'm going to get dried out and die. So what they do when it starts to be about summertime, these that are in the stomach go into what they call hypobiosis, where they go down into the stomach and they just stay there. And they kind of retreat in there for about 3 months until it's safe again, until it's cool and back off, and then they all come back out and start it over. So this is where this one is a tricky parasite because we want to kill everything in that stomach as well as whatever larvae she's taken in. And I'll show you why. These worms, this is be the little one, the L4 that gets down in the stomach. This is actually a picture of this is looking at the cellular level of the stomach, okay? This is down in the gland, goes down in here and just stays down there and hides. It kind of stays there all summer long. That's called arrested development. It stays right there. Now when the time comes for it to come back out, it's gotten a lot bigger. You know, now this is a big parasite. When it comes out of the gland, it actually destroys it. It destroys the stomach gland. When that happens, the glands don't make acid anymore like they're supposed to. So if it's not acidic in the stomach, it can't digest protein. And so if it can't digest protein, it ends up diarrhea. And a lot of damage. You know, when this thing comes out of the stomach, causes lots of damage to the stomach that can't be fixed. It doesn't fix itself. Oh, yeah, here's the picture. That's a better one. It's the lining of the stomach, and they call it looks like leather, like Moroccan leather, because it's all pockmarked there, and that's where those parasites have come out. This disease, honestly, when I got out of school, which was a long, long time ago, in 1990, we saw some of this, and then it was gone. I mean, it was gone. When ivermectin came out, and we had that pour on, man, it was like the best thing ever, because we didn't see this anymore. And now it's back. This was taken last year. This picture was taken last year. They had dewormed mid-April with that long-acting, that long reign, and kind of forgot about it, forgot that it had run out. These calves got that brown stomach worm. This literally happened almost overnight. These were really good-looking steers. And when it broke, I mean, the parasites came out of the stomach. These guys all got horrid diarrhea. And you see, they lost all their weight. They lost it like that. these came to the diagnostic lab and we did a necropsy where we opened them up and looked at them, and they still had fat. They still had fat on their body. But this is how fast that thing happened. It just wasted their muscles away, not having any protein. So this does happen. This is where we got to start thinking about these are young animals. They needed to be dewormed. They did it in mid-April. They should have done it again about August to keep this from happening. So that's the brown stomach worm. That's the bad one. These other two are not quite as bad, but they can still cause diarrhea in the young animals. So Homuncus and Cuperia. The bad thing about these two guys, they don't die when you use the poron. This is the one we got to use the white dewormer to kill these two. That's why we want to think about when we got young calves, like under a year of age, we really need to use that white dewormer to kill these two parasites. They're warm season parasites, so we're getting ready to have a lot of them in the pasture. And they'll develop some immunity to this by the time they're about a year old. So again, control, use that white dewormer. So basically, we just want to reduce our treatment frequency and also modify our treatment. Be thinking about what we're doing when we deworm. Ensure that they're really effective. Using the right dose. If you don't have a scale, try to use a weight tape or something like that to get at least an idea of what your weight's on. I'm always surprised on weights, especially of adult cows. They're hard to guess. And culling those wormiest animals. So parasites are like anything else. It's like there's 20% of your herd that's carrying 80% of the problem. The 80-20 rule works on almost everything, and it's true in parasites. So if you've got some that are just not able to keep weight and they get diarrhea or they're hard to keep, call those boogers. They're probably wormy. And that's one thing we've done ourselves. Actually, we got better bulls, got better efficiency. We put all this energy in the production of meat and milk, and we've kind of forgotten about this. We've kind of forgotten when you're like athletes. We've got them so tuned up that they don't have a lot of. They get sick easily, and they were susceptible to worms too. So we kind of created some wimpy animals in terms of worms because we just don't pay that much attention to it. So parasite control, again, this is kind of a wordy slide, and I won't go into it too much other than remember, cull those poor doers. Approximately 28% of the animals have 80% of the parasites. Avoid those cheap porons in young animals, right? Dose accurately, handle your drugs properly. This is kind of getting into some other things here about protecting them from getting resistant parasites. So one of the things that is kind of counterintuitive, I think, is it's hard to think this way, but if you deworm a bunch, you deworm your herd, should you move them straight to a pasture that's clean, what you consider clean, no parasites on it? Most people would think, yeah, that's the best thing to do, right? You're going to deworm them and then move them over there to this clean pasture, and they'd be in the best place they can be. But in reality, whatever parasites live after you've given the dewormer, those are resistant. Those are your resistant parasites. You move them to a clean pasture, that's all that's out there then. They're not going to have any of those parasites that'll die when you give them a dewormer. They're going to have the bad resistant worms. So be careful when you deworm. Try to put them back where they were, at least for a few days, before you move them to a better pasture. So this says Merck or Intervet does this fecal egg count reduction test, right? And they've done this for many, many, many years. This is kind of an old slide, but it makes a lot of sense. So this was just using porons. They did that fecal egg count reduction test, And this was their percent efficacy. So remember, you want better than 90% reduction. So when they used just these porons by themselves, ivermectin, poron, dectomax, cydectin, they didn't get anything that was above 90. You know, this was 72, about 60, 78, 67% kill rate. Not good. You know, you want 90 and above. So they looked up also, if you gave those same things, same drugs, but you also used a white wormer with it. So you're pouring on something on their back, giving them the stuff by mouth. So that's a combination. And look at our results there on the efficacy. 100, 199.9, 199.9, 99.9. So it's just much better, especially if you got yearling calves, you're weaning calves, you got replacement heifers, to use that combination. If you'll use them, they're not really, the white wormers are not that expensive. If you use those two things at the same time, you get a much, much better kill rate on your, plus you got your residual time, you know, 3 to 4 weeks that the dewormer is going to work. So again, we've kind of been over this fecal egg count. If you're going to do that, you can get with your vet. I think Merck is still actually paying for this to be done. So all you have to do is get the samples and send that in. Got that. So environmental management, I'm going to leave you with this. These are the things we need to think about besides just chemicals, right? These are things we can do that don't cost us much. Stocking rate. If you overgraze your pastures, you're going to make them eat down there where the worms are, right? Worms, here's your manure pad. A worm can't move over about a foot away from them. That's as far as they go. And as far as they can go up is 4 inches. 90% of the larvae are in the bottom 4 inches, but actually 75% of them are in the bottom 2 inches of grass. So you don't want to make them eat so far down that they're close to the ground or that they're having to eat next to the manure. So try to watch your stocking. If you reseed, till and reseed, or cut hay off a pasture, that really cuts the worm burden down. Exposure to sunshine will kill those larvae. So removal of a lot of overgrowth. If you've got a whole lot of really rank growth in your pasture, getting those mowed off helps. Pasture rotation, people ask me about, well, does that help, to rotate your pastures? It does in the fact that your nutrition is a lot better. I mean, you get better grass, they're healthier, but it doesn't really help in terms of your parasite burden. All right, areas of highest risk. This is really important, are where the animals congregate. Watering troughs, shady areas, sheltered areas. Because manure buildup and high moisture is what those larvae like. Anybody that's got sheep or goats, this is what got them last year. Was these congregation areas really made a big effect with the sheep and goats. They had a lot of them die from these areas. Grazing after the dew dries, hard to tell a cow to wait. But if you have a pasture and you turn them in to graze, then if you wait until it dries up a little bit, the larvae go back down to the soil level. If practical, cattle and sheep and goats can be grazed together, or they can be grazed in sequence, graze cattle and sheep, or graze cattle and goats, because they actually serve as vacuums for each other's parasites. It's kind of neat that works that way. So points to remember: focusing on those young animals, weaning up to 2 to 3 years of age, deworm them twice a year, spring and fall. It's a good way to think about that. Parasite levels in the pasture depend on the weather, so it's the temperature and moisture, how much overcrowding there is. If there's a lot of overcrowding, you're going to have lots of larvae. Repeated use of the same poron dewormers, especially those generic ivermectins. and the long-acting dewormers too will encourage resistance. So that probably would take me all night to explain that one. Let's just leave it at that. Long range is really not for young breeding stock. Long range is a better product for stockers, wean steers, not necessarily for replacement heifers. Again, that's a long lecture. You can practice selective non-treatment. This is what the parasitologists recommend. I don't know many people that do this, but they do recommend just treating like the ones that need it the most. So if you've got fat cows, you've got older fat cows, you can safely skip them and not deworm those. You definitely want to deworm adult cows with a body condition below 5. That means they're a little bit thin. Deworm your bulls pre-breeding. Deworm at least 2 weeks prior to turning the bull out. There's that, like your question there, is what effect does this have? And that actually does affect estrus synchronization, and it has an impact on the ovary. So we want to get deworming done before breeding season. And using combinations of dewormers are really good. Other countries, they put dewormers together and sell them like that. In the United States, we don't. They just haven't been. The FDA won't pass that, so we're kind of stuck with what we have, just using 2 different ones at the same time. Any questions? Sorry, that's a lot of information for 30 minutes.
How effective is the Roma block?
Good question. So the question was about the worm block, safeguard blocks. It all depends on consumption. If they'll eat them, they work. If they eat them, they work well.
So if you got, this is what I look at, if you got 50 heads out there, you gotta figure out how many blocks you gotta have. You have to figure out who's gonna eat what. If she's gonna eat, if she's not gonna eat, who's gonna get more, who's not gonna get.
That's exactly right. And they won't all eat the same.
They all won't eat the same.
Average, you're going to be okay, but you will have. It's like anything. If you do the CTC, and we have that disease anaplasmosis. We try to control that with CTC, but you always got 1 or 2 that don't eat it, and then they end up getting sick. We don't like the blocks simply because we can't control it. But boy, if there's nothing else you can do, or you don't have facilities, definitely they're worthwhile. They're the same as the white dewormer. They're just in a block form.
So it's not no substance or nothing you can spray on the pasture that kills the paradox.
No, and actually don't want to, because those things out there in the pasture, they gotta have some exposure. It's kind of a fine line we want to walk, because they gotta have that exposure to get immunity built up. So we don't want to keep them clean. But we want to keep that level down where it doesn't cause disease, but they still good. It's always a delicate balance.
I call my pastor's creek bait. She eat the good. It's like good, bad, ugly. She eat the good, and she bad, and she ugly. If you keep me alone, she gonna, first of all, she just like a dinner plate. She gonna eat the good first. Then she gonna come get the bad. If you leave her, then she gonna come get the ugly, because she said, I don't have nothing else to eat.
Yeah, and the ugly's where the bush hog comes in. That's because there's not much in that ugly that's good. Another thing you can do is if you got the ability to, what they call creek graze, you can put an electric wire down low enough, let the calves go up, let them eat the good stuff, then let the cows come in second. If you let those calves eat first, then they can really get some growth out of that. Any other questions? All right, well, time for the cow sale. You going to the cow sale? I think it's going on over there. All right.